So welcome everyone to the Femsplainers. I'm here today with repeat Femsplainer, which is kind of like being a repeat offender, Atlantic contributor, Emily Yoffe, again without a cocktail. I'm also here with another repeat Femsplainer, Mona Charen, who is host of the Beg to Differ podcast on the Bulwark and senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And we're joined by a new Femsplainer, Janet Halley. She's the Royal Professor of Law at Harvard Law School and an expert and longtime researcher on sexual harassment. So thank you. First, let me just check in with you all because I assume you've all been quarantining. We're in slightly different parts. I think, Janet, you are farthest away. Are you in Cambridge or?
I'm near Cambridge.
In Boston.
Yeah.
And Mona's in Virginia, a hotbed of infections right now, and Emily's in Maryland. So how are you all doing? I think I'm somewhere between wanting to go out and storming a Capitol, but I know that would be unwise, but I'm starting to go a little crazy, I have to say.
I'm feeling a little guilty for the fact that this is not unpleasant for me, really, at all. I mean, well, a little bit, but compared to other people who I do really feel for, I mean, for us, it's been quite pleasant. I'm here with my husband and my dog, who I think you can see behind me.
Yes.
And you know, other than the fact that we have to, you know, swathe ourselves in masks and gloves to do the simple thing like go to the supermarket or the pharmacy. Other than that, life is pretty pleasant.
Emily, how are you doing?
We're very lucky. We're fine. Our daughter, who's a law student in New York, just arrived last night. We haven't seen her for 3 months. So,
oh gosh.
Yeah, she and her boyfriend just came. They were, "Are you going to hug us?" Yes, we hugged them.
Get there.
They rented a car.
Yeah.
And they said they took off at rush hour, and it took about 5 minutes to get through the Lincoln Tunnel. But you know, so we're lucky. We're fine. I am just very worried about the virus, about the economy, what's happening in the world beyond our lucky little home.
So second to that, thanks for asking, Danielle. I'm one of the luckiest people. I have a garden, I have 2 dogs, and I've got plenty of work that can be done online. So, and I like cooking. Pretty good deal. But what I see across the social landscape is the virus hits different people so individually. And so many people have been hit so hard, so many of my students. So it's a tough time, but I'm fine.
Well, it is. I mean, I feel like Mona that I'm comfortable, but I think getting used to this sort of existential idea of it not ending. Yet all the while, I'm feeling very comfortable now going out in a hazmat suit to do like grocery shopping. Like it's a very strange thing where we feel, you know, grocery stores are large, they have big aisles, and people seem to be, at least in my neighborhood, being very obedient, but it's just strange to think of this going on and on and on. And as you say, Emily, the economic hardship and also the human toll. I mean, just reading about people with not just struggling economically, but with small children and anyway. But thank you for coming. We've long time wanted to do a story on the Tara Reade accusations against Joe Biden, the effects on Me Too, the accusations of hypocrisy to those who say believe all women, and now it becomes believe some women. And then on top of this, very recently, there have been big changes to Title IX, which is the federal law that prohibits sex discrimination in education. And we've talked about this a lot on the program, how until now, Title IX has been used in a very sketchy way without due process to many of the people accused under it of sexual harassment on campuses. And so it suddenly all came to me that it all sort of ties together in a wonderful way, in that, Emily, you have written so brilliantly about all of these issues, but how our changing notions or ideas of consent, which have been endorsed by Joe Biden, may have come back to bite him. I mean, he's been a champion of, of women who make complaints against politicians. He was hugely behind the implementation of the new the old Title IX rules in 2011. And now he is finding himself in a position where the things that he is accused of having done would have him in big trouble in any other place, any other realm, in his own realm, actually. He's in big trouble now.
Do you want me to take it away?
No.
Okay. I have to say, my other two femsplainers here have written brilliantly about this, and Janet has written some of the most important work, not only on Title IX, but the whole feminist movement that's led to Me Too and the consequences of it. Let me start by saying I think one of the most important things that needs to happen in this country is the end of the presidency of Donald Trump. And so talking about Joe Biden and his problems is a very fraught topic right now. But I did write last year in Politico when the initial round, this was before Biden declared he was running for the presidency, there was an initial round of complaints against him by women who said he had come up behind them, kissed them, maybe put his nose in their hair, kind of unwanted touches, etc. And some of the women even said, I'm not saying it's sexual harassment, but he touched me in a way I wasn't comfortable. I didn't have permission. What's he doing? And a lot of people tried to dismiss this as trivial, but these, as I wrote, and other people have written now about Tara Reade, that behavior, were he a college student or a college professor, would likely have led to very serious consequences. Certainly, if someone had filed a formal complaint, that would have led to an investigation. He has touched people. He acknowledges it himself. And there would have been, Janet is on campus. She can confirm whether I'm right. There likely could have been very severe consequences for him. And now we see with this more serious Tara Reade accusation of an actual sexual assault that he adamantly says he didn't do. In the end, you hear him say, it didn't happen, never happened, never happened. Well, that's not going to cut it on campus, just saying never happened, you need to believe me. So, we're seeing the ironies of him being caught in this system, but also saying you need to, what evidence can I offer you, except that's not what I do and not what I did. And neither he nor the Democrats in general, who after the Tara Reade allegation suddenly discovered due process, the need to listen seriously to both sides, impartially weigh all the evidence you can. No one has talked about extending that to young men on campus, for example.
Mona, I was just going to come to you because you've also, I want to just say, echo Emily, you've all written brilliantly on this, and you have recently written a column on Tara Reade.
I addressed a number of these matters in a recent book called Sex Matters. Look, I completely echo what Emily said about believing that the country desperately needs to be rid of Donald Trump as president. That much having been said, I do applaud Betsy DeVos's revision of the rules that the Obama administration promulgated on sexual assault and sexual harassment in 2011, the Dear Colleague letter, which was the source of a lot of the injustices that our other two guests have been good at pointing out. And the fact is that everything she says about Biden is true, that in a campus tribunal, he would have been denied the opportunity to know who his accuser was, the nature of the offense that he had committed, or the opportunity to cross-examine during a hearing. So those things have been changed under the new rules, and that's all to the good. But there's another point here, and you asked about the hypocrisy, and of course it's legion, and it always is when it comes to these kinds of sexual harassment matters. I mean, when Bob Packwood was accused of some inappropriate behavior, all of the Democrats were in high dudgeon about the need to get rid of him. On the other hand, when Bill Clinton, or when Clarence Thomas, but when Bill Clinton was the malefactor, then they changed their view. And that happens again and again and again in our politics. People's principles are very malleable. But looking at all the facts, as I did in a deep dive, or attempted to do, let's say, with Tara Reade, I don't know that I don't claim to have any kind of, crystal ball here. But there are a lot of problems with her account. She has changed her story many times. There does seem to be a clear motive for her to lie. And I do believe it's important to take each situation on its own merits and evaluate it fairly and entertain the possibility that an accusation is just that, an accusation, and need not be considered a conviction. And I believe Joe Biden in this instance. I wish he would change his views about the proper standards of proof in these cases. Maybe this experience will be a searing one for him, but in any case, that's where I come down. I believe he's innocent. I think the rules he promulgated or helped to promulgate were bad.
Well, these rules won't be necessarily go through until the new rules until this August of 2020, and I think he has promised that he would try and reverse them.
Yeah.
But Janet, you have been. I mean, you're a very outspoken feminist on campus, and you have come out also strongly against the old Title IX. Or I guess still existing Title IX. And you actually said at one point that you feared, this lack of due process for the accused. And you wrote at one point, you said that these rules will enable people who enthusiastically participated in sex to deny it later and punish their partners. They will function as protective legislation that encourages weakness among those they protect. They will install traditional social norms of male responsibility and female helplessness. So you never even liked them from a feminist viewpoint. How do you feel about the Betsy DeVos new rules?
So I've been reading them really closely for the last several days. I think that the student activists should feel good about almost everything in them, in the sense that they codify in a new way, in the way that the DCL never did, the Dear Colleague letter that Joe Biden helped inflict on all of us, never did. The clear procedural rules, the need for impartiality and fairness and lack of conflict of interest, the continuing application of constitutional norms, all of those things were completely muddied by the DCL, the Dear Colleague letter in 2011. And schools were terrified because in the middle of a cloud of shoulds, you should do this, you should do that, there was this paragraph saying, and we'll defund your entire institution if you don't comply with this completely unclear document. If that document was handed into a professor of law in a regulation course as the final product, the professor would uniformly fail the student. Now comes, let me say, in the schools were so terrified by that infinite demand with threatened to defund that they invented the single investigator model. That wasn't anticipated by the OCR when it wrote the DCL. DCL is written on the assumption that there would be a hearing, but schools didn't. They went in another direction. They went to the single investigator model. And the single investigator is a very, very profoundly unfair institution. It's terrifying to sit across the table from a single investigator who has plenary power over the futures of both the complainant and the respondent. It's unfair to everyone. Now we have clear rules that there has to be a Title IX coordinator who initiates a process, receives a formal complaint, and does legally fair things with it, a sequence of steps that are clearly spelled out. Schools can come into compliance with that. There's a blanket requirement of treating the respondent and the complainant impartially. There's a requirement of no conflicts of interests. There's not enough decision maker autonomy, but there's a lot more than there was. And there's a hearing. There's a standard spelled out that gives an option for clear and convincing or preponderance, and there's cross-examination. The fairness level of that set of rules is an order of magnitude higher than what we've had at colleges and universities under the interim effects of the DCL. So although I agree that Trump is a terrifying president, and although I agree that he must be replaced, and although I anticipate that Biden was going to have to be the person who replaces him, I think it's irresponsible to oppose basic fairness in campus sexual politics proceedings. And if Biden doesn't get off his line, which is we're going to restore the DCL, I think that the Tara Reade event could not be better time for pointing out to him, put in place a procedure that you would want to face yourself, or that you would want your son or your daughter to face. And that would not be the DCL. It would be something much more like these new regs from the DeVos DOE. So I hope that was short enough.
Yeah, no, Emily, and maybe put it in context for people who are, less of the legal aspects, but people who you've talked about who whose sons have been just charged without any hearing, without any warning. There was, under the previous rules, there was no notice requirement. They could literally send you a document that said you'd been accused of sexual misconduct, and there were no details.
I'll tell you what it was. There was a case of Skidmore, male student at Skidmore, who'd been expelled from Skidmore for alleged sexual misconduct, was reinstated several years later. You need to have, if you're going to challenge this in court, you need to be lucky enough to have a family that can fund your civil suit against your school. This young man it took several years to work through the court system. The judge said, not only was this young man not told explicitly what it is he's alleged to have done, at his expulsion, he was not told what rule he was alleged to have violated. Now, obviously, as this thing goes on, you figure out, it was the Saturday night in November when I got together with so-and-so. I've done interviews and stories of young men who never received written notice of what they did wrong, who were subjected to this, as Janet was talking about, single investigator model. That is one person, the Title IX officer, who under the Obama era rules did not have to be unbiased, and who was the police, investigator, judge, jury,
executioner.
Thank you very much, Mona. And as Janet also pointed out, I've seen a lot of commentary recently about how shocking horror Betsy DeVos has said there are going to be hearings and both sides can be questioned. As Janet has pointed out, the original Dear Colleague letter assumed hearings. Hearings have been going on. This is not something Betsy DeVos invented, but subsequent guidance from the Obama era Department of Education endorsed the single investigator model, which some schools had turned to. Now, Joe Biden wants to reinstate all that guidance. So, I mean, he wants to reinstate guidance that describes how terrible hearings should take place, and guidance that says there should be a single investigator. So just simply reinstating, as Janet said, legal documents she would flunk is absurd on its face. And Biden issued this response immediately. As Janet said, she's been working through these documents, 2,000-page document. I doubt Biden read it or his campaign read it, or they even really fairly weighed, are there things here we should do some jujitsu? And we should say, you know what, we're for due process too. And they just, unfortunately, at every turn are failing to say that. And even
except as it comes to Tara Reade, then suddenly.
Well, even after Joe Biden is himself what he is, a falsely accused man. Now, he has lived some of the most horrendous things a human being can endure and borne them with great grace. But I would imagine sitting there and asserting, I am being falsely accused, has to be one of the most terrible thing that's happened to him. And as we're all pointing out, anyone who faces that kind of accusation needs some fundamental fairness. And we're not hearing this from them. And I agree with Janet. You can want the end of the Trump presidency and also believe fundamental rights are important too.
Well, looking at it from the other side, and Mona, because your book, you talk to a lot of young women on campus, and one of the things this was trying to address, like the Me Too movement in offices, that a lot of these, what happens to women in dorms, what happens at parties, does not necessarily rise to the level of rape or assault, but it's wrong. And I think in some ways this may have been a way that women are upset. There's a lot that is happening to them on campuses. And this was a very clumsy and wrong way when you don't have due process to use it. But none of us, of course, are for sexual violence on campus. None of us want to see rapists get away with it. But what do you do about these murkier circumstances where women are taken advantage of, or they are touched and forcibly kissed and go through other, things on campus? What do we do about it?
Right. You kind of read my mind. I was just going to clarify that, of course, there is a lot of really bad behavior happening all over the world, and including on college campuses. And there are women who are raped, and there are women who are abused in lots of ways, and men too. And there does need to be a way for them to get redress or justice. And I think the Obama administration went way too far in the way they did it, and they neglected the rights of the accused. But of course, there have to be procedures in place for people to get redress. Now, there's also a deeper question, though, about how to protect women from being abused that gets into some of the pieties of feminism. And there you find that the people who sometimes are on the side of not protecting women are feminists themselves, who don't want to acknowledge what I believe is just a reality of life, which is that women are more vulnerable to sexual violence than men. And therefore, they have to approach life with a certain assumption that they have to take care of themselves and they have to be careful. And I cite in the book, I might have even gotten it from you, Emily, from one of your great pieces, but the story about this company had developed a kind of nail polish that you could put on that would turn colors if you had been given, if you'd been slipped
yes.
a date rape drug. And some of the feminists objected to this and said, I won't repeat the language, but you know, I don't effing want to wear any kind of nail polish. I shouldn't have to. And just teach